Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Chad Vaughn, and on today's episode, we have Jason Leydon. Jason is a regular with us at Power Monkey, having been a coach at camp since PMC1. He's the owner of CrossFit Milford, as well as the founder of Conquer Athlete. And we are talking about what's been going on so far at the semifinals over the course of the last few weeks. We go into what the new format looks like, what athletes to be keeping an eye out for the games next month, as well as what the first couple of weekends have looked like, what performances have been standout, and really what's going on in Jay's mind as he has athletes on the individual, masters, and team side of things. So he has some really great insight with this new format leading up to the games in July, and we hope you guys enjoy it.
Well, Jay, thanks for making the time as usual. It's always good seeing you, man. You know, we had camp just a month and a half ago, and we miss you already, and it's good to be able to get you back on short notice. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. Yeah, I love talking to you guys. This is awesome. I'm excited.
So we want to give a little rundown on how competition season's been going so far. I think, you know, all the CrossFitters out there that follow us are probably fully entrenched in the new semi format that's been going on. And, you know, I was just mentioning to you off air that we were watching, and you, for whatever reason, were front and center the last 2 weekends on the broadcast. Like, I don't know who you're paying off, but you are right in the front row. Camera seems to love you, but you've been in attendance for the last 2 week events, both down in Knoxville and the Granite Games last weekend. And first, just general impression, how are you feeling about things being back up and running again in person, being able to go back in an event, and what the last 2 weekends were like in general?
Yeah, I think it helps having Ty being the head camera guy.
Right.
Yeah, because Ty seems to always be like sniping me, but it was awesome being back at competition. You know, I remember Dave being back at Albany, right? When you and I would be working together a lot on our teams and our athletes, and you'd go up to Albany for the East Regional, and there'd be a ton of people there. And walking into the Mid-Atlantic was awesome because they did such a good job down in Tennessee. They ran it so well, and there are people in the stands, right? We weren't wearing masks. We weren't like confined. We weren't spread out. It was like the old times. You know, the athletes had their warm-up area. Coaches were walking around. People were in the stands cheering. And the way they set it off with that heavy snatch, especially with Tia being there and Christine Cole and some of the like 7 dudes and a 300-pound snatch, it was electric, you know, just like it used to be. So it really brought back that old feeling. And then at Granite Games is very similar. Granite Games is a really cool venue, being outside. But again, the same thing, just having the fans there and being there. And I know I saw it down at Torian Pro in Australia. They had a pretty packed out crowd as well. So it's really bringing it back to the feel before two things, before COVID and also before they got away from regionals. You know, this made it feel like regionals all over again. And it was awesome because when they first went away from it and it went to like all these different venues, you know, it was cool, but it didn't have that environment of a regional of like, hey, make it or break it is right here. Like, oh, because before it's like, yeah, if you don't make Wadapalooza, well, all right, we can go to 8 different other events to try to make it, right? But now it's like, this is it. This is everything right here. So the stress, the pressure, the fans, the excitement, it was back. You know, it was back.
Yeah, it's almost like Olympic trial type of feeling. Like in the gymnastics world, we have our Olympic trials. They're actually coming up in 2 weeks. It's the situation where they're going to select the Olympic team that's going to be going to Tokyo in August, July and August. And in a lot of ways, that competition is more exciting than the Olympic Games sometimes because that's where the team is selected. You know, what's on the line there is to be able to actually go to the Olympics in the same way that in the past, the regionals will qualify someone to go to the games. It was such a big deal to be able to qualify. In some cases, you know, there's a lot of people that are just happy to go to the games and just be there, not necessarily worried about being on the podium. Qualifying is such a big deal. Now, semifinals has brought that back again, right? It brought back that feeling of, you know what, this competition matters. It's not like you have 6 more outs or another one you can just jump to. And I think that matters in terms of people's attention spans, saying like there's some kind of there's purpose to this event beyond just watching, you know, people lift heavy weights. There's something on the line, which is pretty sweet.
Absolutely. And the energy put forth by the athletes is back. You know, and it's not like it never went away, but hey, like I'm standing next to these three guys, and if I want to make the top 5 or the top 8 to be in the last chance qualifier, I have to beat them. Otherwise, I'm done and my season's over, and we're back to square one. And that excitement and that sense of urgency is there for every single person. You could see it. Like even Tia, like she was just like dominating workouts, and like she never let up, not once. And it was just cool. Yeah.
So with that being said, one of the things we were just talking about off the air that I want to bring up to everybody, I was curious because, there's another few semis going on this weekend starting today. We're recording this on the Friday prior to the actual broadcast being put up. But the events for each of the semifinals are different. And starting to see that. I didn't realize that until fairly recently, but can you talk a little bit about what that's like as a coach, having to prep athletes for different workouts, for different semifinals, and what that does in your mind in terms of really selecting the right group of people that are going to be going to the games? Do you find that to be potentially, a barrier in some ways and really trying to pinpoint who's best? Because where you end up going, if those workouts fit into your wheelhouse much better than another semifinal, that puts you in a much better situation. Like doesn't seem like it's a fair across the board in terms of how the workouts are laid out, but curious to hear your thoughts.
Oh man, that is such a good question. And I say that for a few reasons. Number one, I've always tried to stay away from analyzing programming, because I think that's the easiest thing coaches can do is like overanalyze or bash something going on. But it's true where people try to self-select the workouts they're going to based on who they think is programming based on what their strengths are. And it's sort of like becomes this game. And I know when the athletes made it, they had their choice to choose what their top 3 choices for semifinals. And all of our athletes would be thinking, well, which one do you think I should go to? Because I heard so-and-so's programming here and they like to program this way, and I'm this type of athlete. And if I go there, they have this. So it almost pulls away from, well, is it a test of fitness or is it a test of like trying to game the semifinals on his strength? Now, you can argue that, yeah, the fittest there is still going to make it. And I agree. Like, no matter where Tia goes, right, she's winning. No matter where Haley goes, she's going to make it, right? No matter where Travis goes, he's going to make it. So you have like the top 2 to 3 that I think would make it probably anywhere. But then I do think that like that 4th through that 8th spot is more athlete specific and based off where they sit. And I was talking to one of my good friends whose team actually qualified at the MAC. They were at the Granite Games, and they're like, man, and they did well at the MAC. I don't want to say where they finished just for the sake of giving it away, but they're like, man, if we had the Granite Games, we wouldn't have even been top 8 based off how the workouts were positioned, right? So now you have a team that's going, and they're like, wow, we wouldn't have even made it if we were here. And I bumped into Casher at one of the semifinals, and we were breaking down the workouts, and he was even like, I don't know what kind of test this is. So it is interesting at some of the semis where the athletes can game it based off what sort of athlete they are. So that poses the question of, for some of these, yes, they are fit, right? I'm not taking anything away from that, but there is that gaming approach where some people are going to try to go to a semifinal that they think is going to favor their strengths. Can it be set where every semifinal is doing the same format of workouts and makes it equal across the board? I mean, maybe, but then that also kind of pulls away from the unknown unknowable. So I almost think like at some point there might need to be some sort of governing body within inside the sport that maybe, all right, like so-and-so is doing the semis and the programming, but there's still like a sounding board of like, hey, what workouts you're doing? Let's take a look at them, make sure they coincide with what we define to be fitness across the board for CrossFit. But it is interesting when you start breaking that down. I mean, I know I kind of rambled a little bit. I don't know if that was what you're looking for.
No, it all makes sense to me. A couple additional questions there. One, wasn't regionals in the past uniform across the weekends? Wasn't the same workouts in regionals?
Yeah. Regionals was uniform. Absolutely. So, and people would, if you went the first week, you'd have less time to practice versus the people the last week. But everyone was in the same boat. Right. Everything was the same boat. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was that situation where, you at least, I mean, if you put the workouts a little bit ahead of time, at least everybody knows how much time do you really need to prep at that point. It's just about
Right.
knowing and having a similar standard across the board. I see where the value is in terms of just testing everything, since that's what CrossFit kind of does in general, and you're going to get that at the games. But it is curious in terms of where you end up can dictate whether or not you make it to the games. You know what I mean?
100%. Because if you have some events that have a ton of machines, and the machines that say have a lot of points on them, and the stuff coupled with machine isn't that high, well, then it isn't in favor of a bigger guy versus someone that might be more gymnastics based, because it comes down to their ability to finish the machines. And pound for pound, the bigger guy is going to finish those faster. And if it's like that across the board for all the workouts, well, then that's going to be a more bigger guy dominant sort of area, right? So it's interesting when you start analyzing that stuff.
Yeah. What do you think, Chad? Do you think there's any benefit to keeping it semifinal the way that it is right now?
Yeah, it's really a tough question to answer. I mean, there's pros and cons to both for sure. I can't really decide on that. I kind of like it both ways for certain reasons. But did I see somewhere, Jay, that there are some online events this weekend where CrossFit is doing the programming?
Yes, there are online events, the Atlas Games online. I don't think CrossFit is doing the programming. I think the programming is still up to that company, but I could be wrong. I haven't really dove into that too much.
Yeah, I thought I read that somewhere. Maybe I misinterpreted it, but that would be another potentially a little interesting twist, because I think I read also that they may have changed them to online from what was going to be in person, which potentially changed the programming. And you were saying earlier that some of these athletes are making those decisions on who they thought was programming. So that'll be an interesting little twist if that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know the Atlas Games, I think, has a workout coming up like 60 ring muscle ups in it. Which is
30-20-10.
Yeah, which is a nice little twist. I'm all for that. But that also can throw a wrench in the game of athletes being able to do it in their home setting, comfortable environment, because like going up to Minnesota, there's a twist of the elements, right? They had it outside.
That was a sick venue though, huh? You were at
sick venue. Yeah, sick venue. But dude, the heat, like Friday was 97 degrees and then Saturday was like 103, 104 degrees.
Well, it's like being at the games back in LA. I mean, remember how
hot? Oh my God, it was brutal. Yeah. But so that added a whole nother twist to it for sure.
But the other thing you mentioned was kind of interesting, and I don't know how much insight you have into it, but with regards to knowing who's doing the programming and that potentially factoring into a decision on how you list what semi you want to go to, how readily available is that information? Or are you kind of assuming, according to the location, who's actually doing those programming for those events?
It's Loud and Live took over a lot of them, and you kind of, you can kind of gauge how Loud and Live, the people who program for them like to program based off the previous like Wadapalooza events. That Mid-Atlantic usually has a history of programming heavier, more like bigger person focused sort of sessions based off their previous workouts. And like their team events at Mid-Atlantic, I think are the best team events. They're very team centered and do a great job with it. So as a team, like, all right, if we're a solid team, we move the worm well, we're going to do good at the Mid-Atlantic. We should probably go there. Normally the bigger athletes like to go to the Mid-Atlantic as well, because they tend to sort of favor that based off previous history of programming, and then you look at Loud Live and how in the past they've kind of programmed for Wadapalooza, and you're like, all right, well, we can get a good understanding of how they're going to like the program. But that was different too, because if you look at the individual events at the Granite Games, I don't think any individual event was over like 14 minutes. I think the longest one was 14 minutes. You're like, all right, well, does it really test that true capacity in that realm? So yeah, you kind of, yeah.
So having gone to 2 weekends of semis so far, don't know whether or not you're going to be attending any others, maybe West Coast Classic, that would be the next big one in the States. Anything that surprised you so far from either an event standpoint or an athlete standpoint? Anything that kind of stood out from what you've seen the last 2 weeks?
The athletes, dude, like, first of all, being at the Mid-Atlantic and seeing the snatch event and what these people were lifting was insane. Like it's like 300's the new 275. You know, it's like if you're a guy and you're not snatching 275 cold, it's like you don't stand a chance. And then it was like, all right, well, if you're not snatching 285, well, you're in 10th or 15th place, which is insane, right? And then the girls, 200. It was like, all right, if you're a female snatching 185, hopefully you're staying in the top 10, which is like, what?
Yeah.
Like, it's nuts. And that was crazy to see at the Mid-Atlantic, just how there's the increased strength gains of everybody was crazy.
Well, it's good to see that people were spending their time well and during pandemic and getting
yeah, 100%.
to see that they got some of that lifting strength in place over the course of the last year.
Yeah, and at the Greta Games, it was the teenagers
watching
Emma Cray and Mal O'Brien go after it. Like, I was like, it was awesome. Like, seeing their tenacity, seeing their development, their strength, their technique. They were dialed in everything. Their form looked really good and solid. And the part that I like the most is that it appeared from a mindset and emotional standpoint that they were dialed as well. You know, like, things went wrong for them and things went really good for them. And there wasn't too much of an emotional sway. They were focused and very, like, tenacious throughout the entire weekend. And that was very surprising to me to watch that as well.
Yeah, I want to talk about those girls for a minute, because I mean, it was so impressive to watch. And we had Mal on the podcast a couple of months ago in preparation for this, and she really stood out as someone that was going to make an impact, and she clearly did, as well as Emma. And, you know, Haley kind of kicked this off, right, a couple of years ago with her winning junior level for a couple of years, and then making such a huge impression when she jumped from junior to senior and in the open vision, and you know, doing so well the past 2 years of the games, and saying, hey, look, teenagers can make the jump. So far, it's predominantly been on the women's side. We haven't really seen a male do that same thing yet. But are we seeing kind of CrossFit now starting to develop athletes at a young age? Essentially, like, these kids grew up with CrossFit now. Some of them have been doing it since they were 8 and 9 years old. The sport that they have been doing growing up has been CrossFit, as opposed to the previous generation having found CrossFit after having done a ton of other sports. Maybe they're playing baseball or doing gymnastics or whatever it might be along with it. But this is the first generation that we're starting to see competing in the open division that grew up being CrossFitters and maybe having done it for the first, 5-7+ years of their life. Do you envision that this is going to be the next crop that are going to start kind of growing up with it and taking the sport kind of to the next level?
I do. 100%. You know, if you look at any sport, from gymnastics to basketball to baseball to football, like, the younger athletes get better and better and better every year. And you always see these people jump to these pro levels. And there's always, like, the first couple who kind of paved the way for everybody else. And we can argue that first person was probably Haley Adams, right? Of having that young age where was able to do so well. And I think we're going to find that threshold of teenagers, whether it is that 16 to 17 age range, that develop the structural integrity and stability to sustain the load and the volume and lift the weights and perform the movements over time. And I had this discussion with another coach, and I think the interesting point is this, though, is like, what is the return on investment, though, for teenagers going into the sport at a young age, right? And I think that's something we can talk about, because teenagers going into other professional sports, reaching the pro level, can come a ton of money with endorsements, contracts, and et cetera. But for them to put all this time and effort and focus into the sport of CrossFit, what's the return if they make the games? I think that's going to be interesting to see where it goes for these athletes, because it comes down to the age-old point of these pro athletes not getting paid in the sport yet. I think Kara Saunders put out a thing. She's one of the best. She made the games. For her and her husband to come to the CrossFit Games, it's going to cost them $10,000.
Yeah,
it's like,
amazing.
What money will they get in return from that? You know, and I think that's the thing is they're like, would you put Camden, who's my son, into CrossFit? And I was like, no, because the amount of time I think it takes him to reach that level, what's going to be the return for him if he does make it quote unquote pro? I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's a clarification of not putting him into CrossFit, or not putting him into competitive CrossFit to like take that away from
Right.
his baseball or his basketball or anything else that you envision. And I think the thing you left out there is, most of these athletes probably won't go on to be professional, but what happened to me growing up, and I know most athletes, is college scholarship. That's what you're kind of striving toward. You're having a potential at the end of that, hours and hours and years of dedication to a particular sport. You have college potentially being paid for at the end of that. So CrossFit doesn't have that. There's no collegiate programs that are offering full scholarships to come and do CrossFit at the university. I think that's the missing link for most, because there's no longevity in gymnastics or weightlifting when it comes to a competitive career. And really, there's only a handful that have professional leagues that are paying athletes at a level that make it worth their time to say, if I become a professional, it's going to be paying the bills. Gymnastics doesn't do that. Swimming doesn't do that. It's the Olympics that potentially are a driving point with sponsorship, but college scholarships are really what most athletes are doing their sport for at a young age. And with CrossFit not having that ability to offer that, I think it makes things a little bit more challenging for parents to say, this is what I want my kid to do.
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter to a lot of people, though. I mean, it's just like with weightlifting, to me, I fell in love with it and I was competing and I was doing well. There was absolutely no money in that. I mean, I'm still in debt to this day, still trying to pay off credit cards that I had to use to go to competitions and stuff like that. So it was about the love. It was about the competition. And I think for these athletes, like, they're going to be willing, if you have the amount of passion that it takes to get to the top, you're going to be willing to do whatever you need to financially to go to the CrossFit Games or to compete and do what needs to be done. My greater concern for these young athletes, just like, I mean, we've seen over and over in any sport, like you said, gymnastics, weightlifting, is health and longevity, and if they're good enough to compete at the games and win or get on the podium, it's hard to say that they shouldn't do it. But, would someone be better off taking their time and going a little bit slower, maybe not, just doing CrossFit from the age of 8 to however long they do it, and doing other sports and making sure that they're having fun and they're well-rounded and that they have, relationships in, just being a healthy human. And then maybe they can do CrossFit for a longer period of time and maybe they can end up accomplishing more things. I mean, I can think of so many examples in weightlifting. Oscar Chaplin III, he was a junior world champion. He went to the Olympics in 2000 and 2004. By the time he got to 2004, he was beat up and injured. So he, didn't have a good games. And he was done after that. He was only 24 years old, but he started at a very young age. He did win junior worlds. He did have many records. But I wonder what someone like him would think about would he go back and change that, for example? I can't say that I would. I mean, if I was junior world champion, and maybe say won the gold medal in the Olympics, but I never went back to another Olympics, I can't say that I would not want that, So it's a tough decision, but I think it just depends too on it's tough for me to see as a coach. I mean, we talk technique all the time, and it's tough for me to see as a coach these young athletes when they have any technical issues or any imbalances that are easy for me to see because I look at this stuff all the time and I feel like they're not being addressed, yet they're so good and they're so talented that it's so easy to overlook those things. And that just goes, that's just a mixture of that decision of should they be doing nothing but CrossFit, even though they're basically the best in the world right now.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I feel like that's such a across the board in any sport that can be, I don't want to say debate, but it's like a topic, right? Of the coaches being able to sort of like hold that string or pull that string on talent to fix it for longevity, or kind of ride the talent right away, thinking, well, how much time do I have? Let's see what we can get out of it. I've actually lost a high profile teenager because of that, where I wanted them to slow down and stop to fix stuff. And they're like, and they had other people in their ear, and they let it run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think in general, these junior athletes that have turning senior, these 17-year-olds are going to shape the direction of the sport, especially on the women's side for the next decade or so. And I'm excited to see what they're capable of doing because it's just amazing to watch. And Mal and both Emma, and then there's other ones, Paige Powers, and there's a few others that are just incredible to watch. And so I'm excited, it's fun watching Tia win every CrossFit Games from, since the beginning of time, but competition, it also fuels interest. And so I'm really excited to see what these next generation girls are going to be able to do at the games. What was the most impressive performance, singular performance that you saw, whether it be from the team or an individual that kind of stood out to you? I mean, there were some pretty incredible things, but someone showing like amazing grit, pushing through. It doesn't even have to be a winning performance, but anything that really stood out to you in terms of a singular performance?
Yeah. And I feel like I'm going to try to think hard because my first response to this question is a very like, okay, that makes sense. But honestly, man, like watching Tia compete at the MAC in the workouts to me was like I would leave where I was to watch her compete because of how good she is and her capacity and just how much better she is than everybody and in everything. With every workout that came out, it was like just this engine and this capacity and this grit just to never stop or slow down and to keep pushing the pace. And one workout that stands out was the long running workout where it's Haley and Tia. And Haley comes out just crushing the run, right? And I'm like, all right, like this might be one that I think Haley can win because I thought it came down predominantly to the runner and the gymnastics was there, but it wasn't at such a high volume that I thought could slow Haley down, with the ring muscle ups. And Tia was just right there on the runner and then would get to the gymnastics and destroy the gymnastics. Like just went unbroken. I don't even think any guys went unbroken, right? And would come back and kept picking up pace on the run. I was like, this girl, like she can't be stopped. Like this is insane with her performance and her ability to sustain it across every single workout, from the short one of the clean jerks and burpees to the long one of the running and the ring muscle ups. It was just like watching her go. To me, it was like this girl, like, I don't think there's anybody that can touch her for a couple of years until I saw Mal O'Brien. I was like, maybe Mal O'Brien's young enough where she'll look at Tia and like, not have sort of like that star power on her. And she'll kind of be like, yeah, like whatever, I'm just gonna go out there and have some fun and maybe give her like a push because of that. But that was probably the event that stands out, was the running event with the ring muscle ups where Tia just got in front of Haley and just like between ring muscle ups and wall balls, it was just like unbroken and just flying through for like the entire 28 minutes. Like I was like, Jesus, this girl is crazy.
Yeah, it's incredible to watch. She's another planet. And I think we were just lucky to have her and Fraser over the last few years, both being able to, it's like in the gymnastics side, watching Simone Biles right now, we're watching the all what we thought was physically possible change through one athlete, like, and not just a generational athlete, but an all-time athlete. And so it's about sitting back and just appreciating the greatness that you see.
Yeah. Do you know what else stood out too, Dave? Not to cut you off from a team. I was thinking about this too, was talking to Rich at the MAC and watching Rich. Like I've known Rich for a while. Obviously I've gone against him head to head in a lot of games with our teams versus his teams, and his teams has always changed a lot, and every team dominates.
He's the New England Patriots, man.
Dude, and it's like it all comes back to him. And watching his team this year, which they had, don't get me wrong, they had great athletes. But the other guy, Chase, great athlete, but not overly strong. He's not someone like a Hobart or a Panchek of the people he's on before, right? And the other girls are great athletes too, but they're not Tasia and the other females he had. And they absolutely dominated at the MAC. Like they won every single workout except for the lift. And I talked to Rich after the lift, and he actually made a mistake on his clean and jerk, which I think might have been his first mistake he's made in like 10 years of competing, right? But and Chase snatched what he could snatch. And then moving on from that, the way they handled the worm and the machines and the gymnastics, I was like, man, like hats off to this dude, because this is a brand new team. And every year he's had a brand new team, and every year his teams just dominate every competition. And that was impressive for me to watch too, because with these new people, and I was like, this guy just does it. He just gets it done.
Yeah, he's the Tom Brady of the CrossFit world. They are essentially the Patriots. You switch out that offense, as long as you have him at the helm, that team wins. That team wins.
Yeah.
You have him as the captain of that ship, and it's just incredible to watch. The dude is just built to be a champion. You know what I mean? I don't know if he likes the comparison to Patriots being a Detroit Lions fan, but I can't see any other way. I mean, he's just amazing. What he does.
Totally.
What about Chad? What did you think about Anthony Davis' snatch performance at Granite Games? 340, new record in CrossFit competition. Did you have a chance to see that?
I didn't actually see that specific one. Maybe I need to pull it up and watch it real quick. I'd be interested to see it. How did he do in the other events?
Sufficient. He ended up 10th. He finished 5th in an event. So he had, two top 5 finishes, but that was just.
And he's thick. Like his quads, like the size of my entire body. Dude, at the Granite Games, he I think he power snatched 315. And all of a sudden there's like rumors going around in the athlete area with like this dude's about to snatch 340. And it was like, what? And every athlete and female like rushed to where we can kind of see, and sure enough, he puts on 340, Chad. It was just like butter, just huge, and drills it. It was like 340. Like, my God.
Yeah, I mean,
it looked that challenging too. I mean, it looked pretty manageable.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, I mean, all these athletes that are hitting 300, it's amazing. I mean, that's a huge snatch, for a sport specific weightlifter. Yes, there are a lot of weightlifters snatching a lot more than that, but it just makes it even more impressive to me to see that number of athletes doing 300 plus, and then talking about a guy doing 340, as a CrossFitter that competed fairly well across the board, placed 10th in a very competitive field. It's just becoming more and more impressive, and even more impressive to see that as a whole. I hate to talk about technique all the time, but as a whole, I think the technique's really not quite as good as it has been in the past. But again, that makes it more impressive to me. So I'm glad that you worded it earlier, Jay, as these athletes are gaining so much strength, because that's what it is. They're just getting freakishly stronger because the technique's really not any better, which again makes it more impressive to me.
Can you mention that one more time, Chad? So you're saying that the technique that you're seeing right now from lifters in the CrossFit world is not as good as it had been in the past?
I think across the board, it's probably a little less overall than it has been. And it's been that way to me, look from the outside looking in, for the last handful of years or so. There was a couple years there kind of in the middle, because, I can't even remember the year I started going to the games, probably like in 2011. And I went for like 6 or 7 years straight and just watched all the time, as much as I possibly could. And I felt like a few years into that, the technique was kind of continually improving. They were starting to move more like what I perceive as an elite weightlifter does. And then a couple years later, it just kind of seemed to fall off. Like coaches and athletes aren't paying as much attention to the basics, and they're kind of letting more things slide, because these athletes, more and more athletes are coming in that are more and more talented and that are just freakishly strong. And so I think that those things kind of fell to the side because CrossFit has gotten more and more popular and has brought in more and more talent. So it'll just be interesting to see kind of what happens through the years, if that kind of continues to be a trend, or if people kind of focus back in on technique a little bit more with the barbell specifically. But again, in any case, they've continued to lift more and more weight. We've continued to grow in the number of athletes, male and female, that are snatching and clean and jerking, like you said, Jay, the base of 200 and the base of 300 pounds. And it's amazing.
Dave, what do you think about gymnastics? Do you think the technique in gymnastics has gotten better?
I was watching pretty closely the muscle up events and some of the handstand walking over the last couple of weeks. I actually do. I think the ring swings, for me, the mechanics of the swing is a big indicator as to whether or not people are working on technique. It's not so much, I know they're strong, to Chad's point about strength being at an all-time high. I know that they're strong. I know they can do dips for days, but seeing what ring swing looks like to me, it's where I kind of like focus my attention, because it tells me whether or not they actually put an emphasis on the parts that most people don't want to work on. And for what I've been seeing, it's actually been looking better than what's been in the past. So from my perspective on the gymnastics side, I'm encouraged that technique is actually being take into consideration a little bit more. But I'm surprised to hear that on Chad's part, because I thought that, and it's a little frustrating from, I think, my perspective too, being that like what we do, Chad, is all about trying to impart the wisdom of technique and say like, this is something you guys need to really be focusing on. And the fact that maybe it's dipping a little bit is a little frustrating. Maybe we're not doing a good enough job on our end.
Yeah, I'll take the blame on that. How about that? No, that doesn't say that that's the case for everyone. There are a lot of athletes that are on point, that are really good. They do move like elite lifters. They look like elite lifters, and it's really good to see that. I just kind of think as a whole, and I wonder too, on the gymnastic side versus weightlifting, technically, if it has anything to do with like with the barbell, there's load, right? And there's also a lot of heavy deadlifts and when you're breathing hard and you're snatching, clean and jerking, squatting, deadlifting specifically, the form goes a little bit, or at least the ability to completely engage the way that you need to with a 1 rep heavy snatch or heavy clean and jerk or heavy deadlift, the way that you would if you weren't breathing hard, as opposed to gymnastics where it's body weight. So they're able to probably stay engaged a little bit better and a little bit longer. Do you think there's any truth to that, Dave?
I'm not sure. It's very well a possibility, but one of the things that I think we're starting to find more of the more that we do these things is you're talking about breathing patterns, right? And when you're doing a gymnastics routine, you're doing a gymnastics skill, especially because we do things for like one time for short periods of time, short duration. We find breathing patterns that are meant for that type of duration. So like our breathing techniques are used specifically for how they're utilized in a routine of gymnastics. Now, a front uprise or a kipping muscle up, what we do in the gymnastics routine, would probably be done one time. In fact, you can't really do a skill in the routine more than one time. It's a deduction. You can't do the same skill more than once. Whereas a CrossFit is do the same thing 100 times. So the whole approach is very different. Now, what we've tried to do is figure out new ways to approach breathing patterns that allow us to sustain the movement for longer periods of time. So I think that the more we do these things, the more we start to see workouts that are taking movements that are meant to be done one time and applying them over a course of 100 plus reps. You're starting to see what's optimal in terms of being able to apply breathing techniques that maybe are different than what you're seeing for a 1 lift heavy, 1 rep max. So I think that it's just still a little bit of this. We're searching a little bit for optimizing exactly how to do it, because the initiation of how those movements were meant to be done is very different than the application of what we're seeing now.
Yeah. And what you're saying, Dave, it brings something else to mind. Let me reword what I said earlier. It's not so much technique. The technique is really good. The positions and the movement as a whole, they have that down. Like when you think of technique for a snatch and a clean and jerk, you think the pull portion of the lift. How's the athlete lifting it from the ground? What are the angles that are created and all that stuff? So it's not so much technique. It's more, there's a handful of basics that are missing, like a rounded back, for example, or, you can see if someone's bottom position of their squat isn't prepared because their receiving position is very compensated and uncomfortable looking. And they're just kind of lucky that they're strong enough to hang on to it. What you're talking about with the breathing, that's a basic component as well. Maybe that's off. So it's not so much technique as it is basics.
Yeah, makes sense.
You know what's crazy? Speaking of strength and where these people are going, we had a lifter at the Granite Games who went for a 375 clean and jerk. He missed the bar in front, so his knee hit the ground. It was a no rep, but he didn't know it was a no rep. So 375 front rack position, knee on the ground. He stands up. With 375, he gets his foot back underneath him, stands up with 375. It was going to go for the jerk, but the guy was like, no rep, no rep. I was like, how in the world did you just have one knee on the ground and stand up with 375 in a front rack position? Like, that is insane, the strength of these guys out.
That might be more impressive than the 340 snatch, to be honest with you. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
We can't focus only on strength, though. I think that's really important. We have our 10 skills that we need to get, and everyone focuses so much on strength that we neglect the other physical skills that we need to be touching on. So hopefully we take the time to be considering the others when it comes to the next iteration of where the cell is going. But we only got a couple more minutes, Jay, and I want to ask you one quick question about the team stuff, because you've been so heavily involved with team competition over the years, and I know you work pretty closely with the Move Fast Lift Heavy crew. They did really well last weekend. I'm curious what you're anticipating from the team side. I know you mentioned Mayhem kind of standing out, but have you noticed anything specific with the new team format going back to kind of affiliate cup type style where it's, you guys all have to be kind of in the same general area, can't be these super teams anymore? Are you happy with this new format, and what are you looking for from the teams going into the games?
Yes, I'm very happy with the new format. I think it added a lot more excitement to the events themselves. I think having it go back to the team format also draws in a lot of more community involvement from the gyms. So even like there's lots of talks now at our home gym of acquiring another base team to make a couple runs at the games. And I think having that, I'm a huge fan of it. I will say though, I did feel like on a whole, a lot of the teams were behind where they were before they made the switch to the super teams. It just seemed like lots of teams' ability to manage a worm, maybe gyms didn't have worms, but lots of the communication and what needs to go into part of having a team didn't seem like it was there. Lots of teams when it came down to communicating and understanding each other and making quick adjustments based off fatigue factors of each person and really just having a sound team seemed to be a little bit behind. But then I also saw a lot of great things from a lot of teams of just really moving well and controlling it. I think for the people out there with teams or coaching teams, the biggest thing that you guys can do is take the time in the early stages to develop skill sets. Like, don't just go nuts on workouts and programs. Develop, like we've been talking about a lot, technique and the proper skill set and strength to do the movements, not as a standard, but the movements as they should be done. Then once you have that, build their ability to do them together in under tough situations, because that's one of the things I saw a lot is lots of teams, when situations got really hard or difficult, there's lots of breakdown. So I'm assuming they just didn't kind of plan for that or prepare for that. But I think next year it's going to be a whole different setting. I think people are going to be like ready to go with their affiliate teams. It's going to be kind of get back to it sort of feeling with it. And I love having the affiliate team in it. I think it draws a lot of excitement to the community. For the gyms, you could kind of see that at all the events where there are lots of people in the stands kind of cheering for their gyms and for their teams, and that was cool to see.
Yeah, I missed that too.
Jay's talking about basics again. I'm talking about the snatch and clean and jerk, and he's talking about the basic components of a good team. And that to me sounds like it's communication. So get those pause squats in and do those ring dips and communicate. We're all set.
That's it. That's what it all comes down to right there.
The words of wisdom when it comes to getting these guys ready to go for big time competitions.
That's right.
Jay, we know we got to get you out of here. We appreciate the time. A lot of stuff going on the next couple weeks leading up to the games. Anything you want to mention leading up to the games with regards to for things for people to look out for over the next couple of weeks?
No, really. You mean that question threw me off.
No. So with the remaining semifinal weekends and leading into the games, any particular athletes to look for, anything for people to kind of consider when as we're kind of leading up to the games next month?
I would say keep an eye on the West Coast Classic. I think you're going to see some things come out of the West Coast Classic for teams and individuals that can make a strong run at the games. And that's going to be, I'm very interested to watch that and see what happens there. And then I think leading up to the games, I'm really excited about the games. The Masters are being put in a different format, the teams and the individuals. I think we're going to see lots of surprises from Dave leading into the games with really making this games kind of stand out a little bit more. So be on the lookout for all that stuff.
Are you going to be going out to West Coast Classic?
I'm not. No, I told my wife that I'm done. So we have a couple athletes in the West Coast Classic, and a couple athletes in the Atlas Games, but we have a few other coaches going out to handle them. I'm going to stay back and make sure my marriage stays intact.
Understandable.
Basics again. There's basics, right?
Basics. Yeah, totally.
Hey, I feel like I just wanted to say real quick, I'm excited where CrossFit is headed because I feel like with the change in ownership in COVID, with us being away from in-person events and everything else, I think there's potential for, CrossFit games and CrossFit events to be bigger than ever. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I'm looking forward to seeing what the next few years bring for sure.
Oh, I agree 100%. I think they're doing a ton of stuff from affiliates. I'm getting lots of notes and messages from them, and where they're going with affiliates. And I think what they're trying to do with the games for all age groups, from masters to teens to the regular format, I think it's going to get really, really big and back to like that machine that it was before everything changed.
It's exciting to see. Got a lot to look forward to for the next couple of months.
Definitely.
Jay,
right.
thanks for the time, buddy. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing you very soon, maybe at the games in July. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.